We're here because you're looking to really understand something complex, move past the headlines and get to grips with what's actually going on. Today, we're diving into something pretty subtle but really damaging in the workplace: psychological abuse. Specifically, gaslighting, as it shows up in Japanese organizations.
Yeah, and we're grounding our discussion in some specific material excerpts from Gaslighting Unveiled, Strategies to Break Free.
Mhm.
So we can really focus on how this kind of manipulation can get, well, sort of embedded within that specific legal and cultural setup.
Right. Our mission today is to shine a light on how these organizational structures, these cultural norms in Japan, can sometimes, maybe without even meaning to, create an environment where gaslighting happens and what that actually does to employees. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Can your workplace, day by day, subtly chip away at your confidence, your sense of what's real, without you even quite realizing it?
Well, one of the first things the source highlights is this paradox, almost.
Yeah.
How labor laws that are meant to protect people can actually play a part in the problem. In Japan, the rules around firing people are pretty strict, right?
For
To stop unfair dismissals.
Okay, yeah. Meant for protection.
But the flip side is some employers might then use psychological pressure instead
Right.
to, push someone towards resigning.
So because firing is hard, they make the environment unbearable, like a sort of constructive dismissal, but through psychological means.
Exactly that. The source gives examples like constantly telling someone, this job just isn't right for you, or maybe you're making things difficult for the team. Legally, that's not firing someone, but you're hearing that day in, day out. The psychological toll, it adds up.
It sounds like just wearing someone down, bit by bit, making them doubt themselves until they think leaving is their only option, and maybe even their own fault.
That's precisely it. They start to internalize it. And because it's not a formal dismissal, the usual legal safety nets might not even apply in the same way.
They're kind of guided into thinking it was their choice to leave.
When really their choice was manipulated, psychologically cornered.
And then there's the whole power imbalance thing. That seems deeply tied into Japanese workplace culture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Seniority, the hierarchy, it's a really strong feature. Supervisors, senior colleagues, they have a lot of built-in authority.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that power can be misused. It can definitely open the door to gaslighting.
How does that actually play out? Like, what kinds of things might happen?
Well, a supervisor might constantly criticize someone's work, saying things like, your way of doing things is the real problem here. Or everyone's unhappy with your attitude.
Hmm.
Coming from someone senior, hearing that repeatedly,
Hmm.
it can make you really start to question yourself, blame yourself.
It's that constant drip, drip, drip of negativity from someone in charge. It just erodes your confidence, makes you doubt your own judgment.
Exactly. You start accepting their version of reality over your own.
The sources also talk about something pretty disturbing: companies actually misrepresenting why someone leaves, almost like covering their tracks.
Yes, that's where it gets even more, well, insidious. When they're pressuring someone to resign, they might twist things, distort the employee's performance or behavior.
What would that look like? Give me an example.
Things like, you're the reason the team's performance is down, or maybe vague stuff like, you're just negatively affecting team morale. Hard to argue against, right?
Yeah, very subjective.
And the company often documents these claims, writes them down as if they're objective facts.
So they build this official story, this paper trail, that makes the pressure look justified, even though it's really psychological pressure.
Precisely. And the employee is left with almost no way to push back against this official, documented version of events. It just reinforces the power imbalance.
It's quite striking, actually, that the sources mention a lack of specific laws in Japan targeting this kind of psychological abuse.
Yeah, that's a big gap. There are rules against physical violence or, really obvious power harassment. But gaslighting is often much quieter, more continuous. It slips through the cracks in the legal framework.
So if you're going through this, trying to report it or get legal help is really difficult because the system isn't set up to recognize it easily.
That's often the case. Victims usually need a lot of evidence to show this pattern of manipulation. And meanwhile, the person doing it can just claim they were giving appropriate guidance or, just managing.
The subjectivity makes it tough to prove intent.
Exactly.
This sounds especially bad for non-regular workers, people on contracts, part-time. They're already in a less secure position.
Absolutely. That job insecurity makes them much more vulnerable. If your boss holds the key to your next contract renewal, they can really leverage that power.
Like constantly reminding them their contract depends on performance.
Exactly. Saying things like, your renewal really hangs on how well you do this quarter. It creates this constant anxiety, makes people easier to manipulate.
And I bet the lack of clear, objective evaluation criteria for those contracts makes it even easier to abuse.
You hit the nail on the head.
Mm.
Vague contract terms, unclear standards. It allows for subjective criticism. Your contribution isn't as high as others. Based on what? It's often not specified.
It's like trying to hit a moving target. You never feel secure. And the source mentioned this affects their future job prospects, too.
Yes, that's a really damaging aspect. The constant undermining, being told you're not good enough, people internalize that. Hearing you won't find another job repeatedly can genuinely make someone believe it. They lose confidence, maybe don't even try for better jobs.
So it's not just about losing one job. It can impact their whole career, their professional self-worth.
Okay, what about fighting back? Are there any options? The sources mentioned labor arbitration, litigation.
Well, it's still not common, but cases involving gaslighting are starting to show up more in labor disputes. The source actually mentions one case, a supervisor repeatedly calling someone incompetent, saying they held the team back. And that lawsuit was successful. Okay, so it can happen. The system can recognize it sometimes.
It can. But the source also points out that labor arbitration isn't always ideal for these complex cases.
Why is that?
Arbitration often focuses on mediation, finding a quick resolution. It might struggle with the subtle, non-physical nature of gaslighting. There's usually no smoking gun, no physical evidence. It's more about achieving a settlement than getting real accountability.
Right, maybe smoothing things over rather than digging into the abuse itself. And going to court sounds even tougher.
It really is. Proving gaslighting legally is a high bar. You need to show a consistent, intentional pattern aimed at causing distress. That means finding concrete proof emails, recordings, reliable witnesses, maybe even medical evidence of the psychological harm.
Which is incredibly hard when the abuse is subtle, maybe happens in private conversations, and the perpetrator can just deny it, right?
Exactly. They'll often frame it as guidance or necessary feedback. Plus, as the source notes, colleagues, well, they're often reluctant to get involved. Fear of repercussions, maybe misplaced loyalty.
So the legal routes exist, but they're full of obstacles for victims in these situations. Okay, let's broaden out a bit. How do the bigger organizational dynamics feed into this? Things like fights between departments?
Oh yeah, when departments are competing for resources or influence, psychological tactics can definitely come into play. It's a way to undermine rivals.
So one department might try to subtly make another look bad, using these gaslighting techniques.
Absolutely. Constantly suggesting the mistakes always seem to come from your department or your team is why this project is delayed. It sows doubt, weakens their position, especially if roles and metrics aren't crystal clear.
And what about cliques, those in-groups you get in workplaces?
They can be really toxic. If you're not part of the clique, you can easily be isolated. They might deliberately leave you out of the loop, withhold information, spread rumors.
Just making you feel excluded, undermined. That sounds incredibly isolating.
It is. You feel unwelcome, start questioning your own value. It makes you more vulnerable to the abuse.
One of the most concerning things in the sources was this idea of tacit approval from management. Like leaders knowing it's happening but letting it slide.
That's critical. If the person doing the gaslighting is well-connected or seen as a high performer, their behavior often gets excused, minimized.
Even if it's clearly harming people.
Even then,
Yeah.
you hear things like, oh, that's just their management style, or, well, they get results. It creates a culture where this abuse is basically tolerated, maybe even implicitly encouraged. For the victim, seeing leadership do nothing is devastating. It just confirms their feeling that no one will help.
And that kind of toxic culture must spread, right? Affecting everyone, not just the direct target.
Definitely. Morale drops, communication breaks down, people are afraid to speak up or take risks. It ultimately hurts productivity, innovation. The whole organization suffers.
Let's talk about HR human resources. The sources suggest they're not always the impartial referees they're supposed to be.
It's a really tricky area. HR should be neutral, fair, but they're also part of the organization, influenced by its power structures and priorities.
So that image of fairness, it might not always match the reality.
Sometimes, no. For example, investigating harassment. HR might seem concerned, listen to the victim, but then downplay it if the accused person is powerful or valuable to the company. That difference between how they act and the actual outcome can be incredibly distressing for the victim. Feels like a betrayal.
It points to that conflict, doesn't it? HR serving employees and serving the company's interests, profits, reputation.
Exactly. That dual role can lead to double standards. Maybe being tough on minor issues with junior staff, but turning a blind eye to serious misconduct by executives or key departments. It destroys trust.
What about things like internal hotlines? Are they always effective?
The source suggests sometimes they're used more to contain problems, manage legal risk, rather than truly solve them. Victims might report something but find it gets mishandled, maybe confidentiality is breached, or their concerns are minimized. It can even lead to retaliation.
Wow. So the systems meant to help can actually end up failing people, or worse. Okay, let's focus on this tactic of forcing voluntary resignations. That seems key here.
Yeah, it's a core mechanism. Using that psychological pressure, vague criticisms about performance, or being a bad fit to make someone quit, the goal is to avoid a formal firing and all the legal hassle that comes with it.
So they just make life so miserable, make the person feel so inadequate that quitting feels like the only escape.
That's the idea. And often, these voluntary resignations come with severance agreements. Agreements that include clauses where the employee signs away their right to sue the company later. They often present these when someone's feeling really vulnerable, exhausted.
Yeah.
Makes it hard to think clearly about what you're signing.
Like a final way to shut the door on any future accountability.
Right.
And the source even mentioned destroying evidence.
Yes. Pressuring employees to delete emails, recordings, anything that could prove the abuse or unfair treatment. It leaves the victim with even less power if they try to seek justice later.
So the whole process looks voluntary on paper, but it's actually a calculated form of psychological abuse designed to protect the company. Let's think about the broader company cultures now. What kind of environments are breeding grounds for this?
Well, highly top-down places, where leadership makes all the calls and employee input isn't really valued or sought, obedience is prized over discussion.
We've all seen environments like that where questioning things just isn't done. How does that enable gaslighting specifically?
If someone in charge says, "I never said that," or "you're just misunderstanding," it's hard to argue back in that kind of culture. It silences people, makes them doubt their own reality. They become afraid to speak up about any unfairness.
What about cultures that are purely results-driven, where hitting targets is everything and well, people are secondary?
In those places, psychological pressure can get rationalized. It's necessary to drive performance, or it's for the good of the team. Employees are made to feel their personal struggles don't matter compared to the company's goals. They end up blaming themselves, suppressing how they feel. Hearing things like, "your mistakes hurt the whole team," reinforces that.
So the individual carries all the weight, even if the pressure comes from the system or the abuse itself. And the sources talked about ways companies shut down complaints.
Yes. If you express dissatisfaction or report something, it gets framed as disrupting harmony or being negative. It has a chilling effect. People stop talking. You might hear dismissive things like, "everyone else is coping, why can't you?" or "don't make trouble." It minimizes your experience.
It sounds like a perfect storm, really, where gaslighting can happen easily and stay hidden because the culture discourages anyone from talking about it. Now, what about specific Japanese management practices? How do they fit in or maybe make things worse?
Well, think about the norm of long working hours. Constant exhaustion. It really wears down your judgment, your ability to think critically, makes you more susceptible to manipulation. There's this subtle pressure, isn't there? Like leaving early puts more work on your colleagues. It pushes you to conform, prioritize work over well-being.
That constant pressure just blurs the lines between dedication and abuse. And the seniority system, Nenkojiretsu.
That plays a big role. Age and tenure often count more than ability. It can mean younger or newer employees feel they have no right to voice opinions or concerns. If a boss says you're too junior to have that opinion, it makes people doubt themselves. Just accept things, even if they're unfair. It reinforces that power gap.
So less senior people feel powerless to challenge superiors, making them vulnerable. And the idea of loyalty, how does that tie in?
Sometimes loyalty gets twisted into meaning total submission. Agreeing with everything, never questioning. If you dissent, you might be accused of not being loyal. Hearing things like, "can't you just align with the company policy?" pressures you to suppress your own thoughts, just go along with it. It discourages independent thinking.
It's like the culture itself discourages the kind of critical thinking that might challenge gaslighting, which brings us to this culture of turning a blind eye.
Yeah, the silence of colleagues is huge. People see things, suspect abuse, but they stay quiet, often out of fear for their own jobs. thinking it's not my problem becomes the default.
That must make the victim feel so alone, like nobody sees it or nobody cares, and the focus on wa harmony seems to discourage speaking up, too.
Definitely. Raising problems is seen as rocking the boat, disrupting that harmony.
Right.
If you speak out, you risk being labeled a troublemaker. People might tell you you're overreacting or don't make things worse. It silences victims and witnesses alike.
It prioritizes this surface level piece over actually dealing with real problems, even harmful ones. And the source mentioned a lack of social responsibility.
In some workplaces, there's just this indifference, a feeling that other people's problems aren't your concern. Even if I do something, nothing will change anyway. That kind of attitude lets abuse continue unchallenged.
All this points to some serious structural barriers preventing workers from being heard. The sources mention unions weakening.
Yes, union membership has declined, especially among non-regular and younger workers. That weakens their collective power to advocate for better conditions or challenge unfair treatment. Unions are supposed to be that voice, but their influence isn't always what it used to be.
So a traditional channel for support is less effective for many. What about internal whistleblowing systems?
Often they're just not robust or truly confidential. People are rightly afraid of retaliation, getting demoted, sidelined, even fired. So they don't report things, especially if it involves their boss or HR, who they might not trust to be impartial.
Without a safe way to report things, it's no wonder so much goes unaddressed. And finally, this societal emphasis on self-responsibility.
Right. There's a strong cultural idea in Japan that you should overcome challenges through personal effort, which is fine, but it can mean workplace problems get framed as individual failings. If you complain about overwork or harassment, you might get criticized for not being professional enough or strong enough.
Yeah.
It shifts the blame onto the victim, discourages people from speaking out.
It puts all the pressure on the individual while letting the organization off the hook for creating or allowing bad conditions.
So, summing up, our deep dive today really highlighted these complex, often subtle ways that Japanese organizational structures and these deep cultural norms can unintentionally create environments where gaslighting takes hold and persists.
Yeah, and crucially, how these dynamics systematically push people out, masked as voluntary resignations or blamed on the individual, when the reality is much darker, much more damaging.
And as you think about all this, it really underscores the need everywhere, not just in Japan, to build workplaces where people's differences are seen as strengths, where we value
Yeah.
individuals, creating healthier, fairer workplaces. It's vital work.
Absolutely. And maybe we can leave you with this thought to chew on. Think about the subtle ways organizational cultures, wherever you are, might be unintentionally chipping away at well-being, reinforcing harmful power dynamics, maybe in ways you haven't noticed before.